adult learners, especially folks who want leadership and stuff, adult learners do better going from the concrete to the abstract than the abstract to the concrete. So what I'd like you to, throughout the day, I'd like you to try to make every single thing we talk about as concrete as possible. Think about your church. Think about your setting. Think about particular instances. Think about moments you were in where you experienced these things. So the more that you can make it concrete, not only will you learn more, but it also helps you to be able to integrate this as more quickly into your own leadership. So when we ask people around the country, they basically, they fell into like 4 buckets, with kind of a 5th one that's begun to be emerging, kind of 4 buckets. The first one was, what was revealed was a lack of deep discipleship. They showed up in lots of different reports, but it was things like, we actually thought our congregation was going to be a better witness to our neighbors during this time. We actually thought that maybe we had something to offer, that people would start seeing the difference in the way we treated people and they would be attracted to us, and that really hasn't happened. We didn't love our neighbors nearly as much as we did. Matter of fact, most people didn't even seek out churches as much during this crisis because our lives just didn't demonstrate the difference. We thought we had a deeper discipleship than we did. Some of us feel like we have a discipleship crisis. Others have said, we thought we had a deeper community than we did, a deeper connection. We say things like we commit to pray for the people that we baptize. We nurture them in the admonition of the Lord. We hold each other together. We're brothers and sisters in Christ. We're members of one another. We've taken covenant vows. And all we discovered was everybody divided over what news program they watched. We thought we had a deeper community. We thought we had more leadership capacity. I mean, everybody knows like the whole 80-20 principle, right? 20% of the people do 80% of their work. Every pastor I know would take that deal. If I could get 20% of the people, I'd be in. I am so tired of feeling like it's 5-95. Our people are exhausted. There are places in the country where literally people said stuff like, hey, you can't meet in your sanctuary, but you could meet, if you can be safe, in groups of, say, 12 or less. 12? 12? What can you possibly do with 12 people? I mean, what could a leader do with 12 people? And all of a sudden you start recognizing, wait a second, we don't have the capacity to break our church up into groups of 12. We don't have enough leaders to do so. Some of you, maybe you did, and you were able to, right? It's different in different places. And one of the parts is the church was unable to figure out how to respond to the issues of social justice. That literally our brothers and sisters would tell us, look, what you're seeing now, what you're experiencing, we've been experiencing forever. It's time for you as a church to come and believe us and work with us and trust us. And we found ourselves just as divided as the rest of the world, unable to speak to the large part of the scriptures that talk about things like justice. And all of a sudden we realized we don't have nearly as much capacity as we thought. These are what we call underlying issues. These are complicated issues. There's no quick fix for these. And they can feel totally exhausting. You can find yourself feeling completely half-hearted. I had one of my coaching clients said to me, Todd, I don't worry about whether or not I can lead change. I worry about whether I can survive it. My inbox is a terrible place to be. Every Sunday morning, no matter what I say, half the church is mad at me. I get accused of all kinds of things. I mean, one of my clients is a pastor who led his church through a $12 million capital campaign. They so have grown exponentially. The church is so committed to him as a leader. He made one statement about needing to take more seriously the fact that African American brothers and sisters are telling us something we need to listen to, and got 20 pages of complaints the next day about being too political, buying into a Marxist agenda. Some of you have been there. You recognize that there's this peace that feels as if all of a sudden our churches are they're just like kindling, waiting to explode. And we started wondering, where's the deep roots, the wellspring of life, the trust, the capacity to take on difficult things, to be a witness to others? And we wonder what our leadership is supposed to be in the middle of it. Ed Friedman is one of the people that I often refer to. If you're going to want to get the slide deck for this slide alone, this is the one that you're going to print, you're going to put up on your bulletin board, or you're going to remember. This is the one right here. Ed Friedman says, when any relationship system is imaginatively gridlocked. I want you to just talk with that first sentence. The first thing I want you to recognize is he was a Jewish rabbi who ran who was the leader of a synagogue for over 40 years. He understood religious systems. He worked with church systems, and what he did is he applied what's called family systems theory to those systems. He said, look, you start to recognize churches function more like families than they do like businesses or organizations. I always say, what makes a church complicated is it is a family business. You have inherent relationships, but you're not just here for the relationships. You got a business to do, the mission of God. It's what makes it really complicated, right? He said, when any relationship system, so we are relationship systems. When any relationship system is imaginatively gridlocked, it cannot get free simply through more thinking about the problem. Conceptually stuck systems cannot be unstuck by trying harder. If you hear nothing today, will you please write down this line? Will you please hear me? That if you hear me say anything that sounds like I'm saying, hey, you can do it. Suck it up, buttercup. Try harder. Just go ahead. Come on. Give yourself to it. Wholehearted. Come on. You're missing the point. It's not about trying harder. Trying harder is like trying to paddle a canoe in a river where there's no water. You're just going to exhaust yourself and you're not going to go any further. You got to drop the canoe and go a different way. You got to learn a different way of leading. It says, conceptually stuck systems cannot be unstuck simply by trying harder. For a fundamental reorientation to occur, that spirit of adventure, which optimizes serendipity and which enables new perceptions beyond the control of our thinking processes, must happen first. You know what that line means? It means that if you're really stuck, what you got to do is you got to stick your head up and you got to say, hey, we are in a whole new moment. We need to see things we haven't seen. We need to think things we haven't thought. We got to learn things we haven't learned. We're in a whole new moment. What does Friedman mean by a spirit of adventure? He means the spirit of adventure means it requires learning. You know you are in a spirit of adventure when you come to a moment where somebody looks you in the eye and says, so Pastor, what are we going to do? And you know, honest to God, that the right answer is, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do. I do know we're going to do something. I do know that we're going to go forward. I do know that God is in charge. I do know that God's calling us forward. But I don't know what we're going to do. I don't have a playbook for this. I don't have a plan for this. I've never been here before. And so we're going to learn. We're going to have to learn as we go. This theme comes out over and over and over again. The leadership needed in uncharted territory, the leadership needed when you're in a crisis is by leading the learning. To invite people into a humble, curious, experimental stance where we learn as we go. It's going to require learning, and it results in loss. You can't watch an adventure movie and not know that somebody's not going to make it. If you came on this core of discovery, if you know the book Canoeing the Mountains, you know it's all about Lewis and Clark trying to find a water route that would take them from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean, a water route that everybody thought was there, a water route that would have made this little nation rich because they would have owned the trade route, this water route that 3 different nations were looking for over 300 years, this water route that was part of this myth called the Northwest Passage that made people from Spain and England and France basically look at this big expanse that we now call North America and think all we want to do is get through that darn thing. We don't care who's there. We don't really care what's there. We just want to get through there because what we really want is a way to get raw materials from Asia to Europe. And so they just ran over everybody in their way. This water route was the most important thing. And after 18 months of going upstream, 18 months of paddling upstream, they came to a place where they looked over the Lemhi Pass between Idaho and Montana, and they looked thinking there'd be a stream on the other side. And after 18 months of paddling as hard as they could upstream, expecting that they would now get to put their boats in another stream and now get to go downstream. After 18 months of paddling hard, they'd now get to ride the current all the way to the Pacific Ocean. They would get there. They would take a selfie and send it back to Thomas Jefferson. They would tell them that we are the great explorers who found the Northwest Passage. We found the water route. And when they stepped over the Lemhi Pass, they, of course, found the Rocky Mountains. 300 miles of mountains. 3 weeks ago, I was actually in Virginia. And I got to look at, and do this presentation, looking at the very mountains that Meriwether Lewis would have grown up thinking are mountains. And by the way, they're beautiful. They happen to be a lot smaller than those mountains. You can imagine carrying your canoes over rounded hills that have beautiful Smoky Mountain hills, that have beautiful sunsets, that are lovely rolling past. They had no mental model for mountains. The Mandan tribe told them, there's a river on the other side, we've been there. You're just going to have to cross over mountains. They said, mountains, we're from Virginia, we're great at mountains. My favorite part of the whole story is that they saw the Rocky Mountains for 3 months. You can see the Rocky Mountains from western Kansas on a clear day. They're just hanging out there. And he wrote in his journal, I refuse to believe this will be anything but a safe and comfortable passage, because denial looms really large for all of us. And they found themselves at this moment and they realized we're water guys and we're facing mountains. Which means these canoes that we built with our bare hands, they invented their own boat for this trip. We have to drop. Matter of fact, we might need to burn it for firewood. And if you're the person who came on this trip because it's a water trip and you're really good at water stuff, and all of a sudden they tell you there's no water, you're no longer the expert water navigator. You're just some dude carrying luggage. And your identity takes a hit. How many of you went through the pandemic and realized the job they hired you for, you couldn't even do? Children's ministry, youth ministry, hospitality ministry, welcoming ministry. Oh my gosh, those are hard to do on Zoom. And what was the hardest part wasn't trying to figure out something to do. It was what it did to your own identity. In uncharted territory, a spirit of adventure means you will not only have to require learning, it's going to result in facing loss. And we've got to learn how to take people through loss. So, how do you canoe over mountains? And the answer is, you don't. You got to decide what's more important, canoeing or discovering. Your skills in the past, defaulting to your training, or the adventure of the future. This is where almost every church I know in America is right at this very moment. We're all staring at the Lemhi Pass. We've been staring at these mountains, and we're asking ourselves this question. Here's where we are. We're like this. So, what are we about? Some of us are like this. I know what we're about. We're about the great tradition of canoeing. We're going to make sure there's canoers for every generation. We're going to go back and teach people how to canoe. Matter of fact, we're going to go back into familiar territory and we're going to give tours of canoeing. We're going to tell stories of canoeing. We're going to make canoeing, great again. We're going to find ways to think about how the past was so amazing. And the past was really amazing for a lot of us. And not quite so amazing for everyone. So what does it mean for us to get to this moment and say, is it about canoeing? Others of us are just sitting here going, I don't know. It's not about going back, and I don't know what that is. So could we just stay right here? Could we build a bed and breakfast in this beautiful site? Wouldn't this be great if we could just stay right here? One of my friends, pastors in Denver, Colorado, he said, Denver, Colorado was founded by the brave people who made their way all the way across the Great Plains, woke up one morning, looked up and went, right here, good spot. We're going to stop right here. Nice view, not doing that. And that's where some of us are, especially those of us who are older. We're like this, okay, let's see. How long can I stay here till I get my pension? How long can I stay here till someone asks me to coach, right? How can I, oh my gosh, what could I do? I don't want to do that. Or others of us are asking questions, so what does it mean for us to be people who believe that we went on this trip not to canoe, but to discover? What it would mean for us to drop the canoes and proceed on. Meriwether Lewis must have had that moment sitting there on top of the Lemhi Pass. Thomas Jefferson sent them on this trip to find a water route because it was good for the United States of America's economic survival. It's 1805. The War of 1812 is coming. They know that Great Britain wants to come back, and they want money so they can defend themselves. And the entire economic plan of the United States was built on this water route, and there ain't no water route. You could forgive him for saying, hey, folks, we got to hightail it back as quick as we can to Washington, D.C., and tell Thomas Jefferson the maps are wrong. It's not what you thought it was. And yet he didn't. He proceeded on. Why? Because there was a deeper value than the economic water route. A value that he knew, that he learned because he'd been mentored by Thomas Jefferson. It's not a Christian value per se, though it's not necessarily bad. It's an Enlightenment value. What the people of the Enlightenment believed was that the growth of human knowledge would lead to the growth of human happiness. So the more we learn, the better it will be. So if we really want what's good for the world, what we really need to do is learn what we can. So we're going to keep going. And if you've ever been to Monticello, you know that the very first place that you get welcomed as a guest, where Thomas Jefferson welcomed people to his own plantation, his own mansion, the first place that you got to come, wasn't a place that said, oh, by the way, Declaration of Independence, they gave me my own copy. You know, I wrote it. Oh, yeah, here's some stuff from the White House. I was president. Oh, yeah, University of Virginia, down the street. I founded it, but they gave me this little thing. No. It was all things that Lewis and Clark brought back. Because what he cared about was learning. A deeper value. This is what happens in this moment. This is what's happening in all of our churches. This is, if you have the moment to go from the acute phase to the adaptive phase, you start saying, what are the underlying issues and what are our deepest values that will take us forward? And what will it require us? We were trained for a different context. We were trained for rivers, not mountains. And we need to learn a new way of leading. And leading in this time is going to be something different than we've done in the past. This is what Ronald Heifetz talks about in terms of the leadership that's needed these days. So some of you are familiar with this. This might be a bit of a review, but this is good to set our time for the rest. What Heifetz says is what you do in this moment. Remember, he uses the medical doctor analogy of the emergency room. He said what a good leader does is learns to diagnose and see the problem before you try to solve the problem. Don't just solve the problem. You'll solve it with your old tools. See the problem. So he says, so think about your problems, and and most of our problems are divided into two categories. One category he calls technical problems, and the other category is adaptive challenges. A technical problem is not an easy problem. It's not a trivial problem. A technical problem is a problem an expert can solve, right? So when I can't get my screens to work, my expert in the back goes back and makes sure it gets working, right? If I'm traveling around the country and my technology is not working, I find an 11-year-old in the room who can make my technology work. It's like it works, right? A technical problem is a problem an expert can solve. So when my father has his valve repair, I want a doctor who is a technical expert. I want the doctor to look at my father and say, Mr. Bolsinger, I will do 3 of these today. You're my first one. I'll have had a good night's sleep. I'll be good. By the way, I've done 150 of these in the last 2 months. I've done 1,000 of them in my careers. I know this is a big day for you, but for me, it's just Tuesday. So, just go ahead. You want somebody who's a technical expert. So heart bypasses are a technical problem, right? Flying an airplane, technical problem, right? It's complicated to do, but people can do it. Preaching a sermon on the Trinity without committing heresy. It's difficult to do, but we teach you how to do it. You don't have to do that water or egg thing, right? We can teach you how to preach a sermon on the Trinity without committing heresy. We're a seminary. We can do it. It's complicated, but you can do it, right? These are important things. Those are technical problems. Technical problems are application of current knowledge, skills, and tools to resolve a situation. Adaptive challenges cannot be solved with one's knowledge, skills, and tools. It requires people to make a shift. And look at the list in values, expectations, attitudes, or habits of behavior. How easily do people shift values, attitudes, expectations, habits of behavior? And how do you know which values, expectations, attitudes, or habits of behavior you should shift or not? You don't want to shift them all. What an adaptive issue is a complex systemic problem with no clear answer that's going to require a different way of addressing the problem. So let's just be clear. When my father has his valve work on, I want a technical surgeon. When I get on a plane tomorrow to fly to Minneapolis, I don't want an adaptive pilot. I don't want a pilot who has to wrestle with values. Adaptive challenges are a lot like spirit of adventures, right? They require learning. They result in facing loss. They reveal gaps. What we just talked about earlier, we thought our discipleship was better than it was. We thought our community was better than it was. Adaptive challenges are these deeper systemic. I don't believe in adaptive dentistry. But if you try to be an expert, giving technical solutions to adaptive challenges, you make the problem worse. You revert back to training. You tell people they can't grow or go forward. It requires a different kind of leadership. So let me just give you a couple more thoughts, and then we'll take a little bit of a break. So, psychologists tell us the three hardest words for someone to say are not "I love you" or even "I forgive you." They are, anybody know? I don't know. They actually asked the question to a group of 7-year-olds, at the University of Leeds. They asked them a nonsense question. Here's what they asked them. What do feet have for breakfast? What does blue smell like? And when they asked that question to 7-year-olds, what they found is the majority of 7-year-olds made up an answer. They went back to the 7-year-olds and they said, look, you're smart kids. What do feet have for breakfast? And they went, I don't know. Well, why did you answer? They said, because it felt embarrassing not to have an answer. That's at age 7. What about 37, 47, 57? The hardest thing for us to actually do is to stand before a group of people and be their leader and acknowledge that we need to be learners. Eric Hoffer said, in times of great change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists. And this is exactly the moment that so many of us, especially those of us who are in senior leadership, find ourselves. Those of us who have master's degrees or doctorate degrees, or have been told over and over again that you're the expert, you're the person, you're the man of God, you're the woman who listens to the Spirit, you're the person, you're the learned person. And we find that our learnedness makes us beautifully equipped for a world that's passed away. Learners inherit the earth. So what is it that we need to do? We need to be people who learn how to lead into uncharted territory, who need to be learners. And what we'll talk about in the next section together is how we lead people through loss. Because the hardest thing for most of us is having to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb. To tell a group of canoers they need to drop their canoes, and to help people face the necessary losses that are going to require of us to move forward.